Hello everyone, my name is Gabrielle and I am a second year undergraduate student at Simon Fraser University. Today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Richard Butler about his research and academic career. Dr. Butler, thank you so much for being here and coming down all the way from Prince Rupert to talk to us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So, you are obviously most well known for the development of the tourism area life cycle model, but as you explained in your talk with my class, you've also explored many other areas of research. Is there any other research or area of interest that you're particularly proud of or wish was cited more frequently in the literature?
I'm happy with the sort of ongoing stuff on sustainability because I desperately in favour of sustainability, but worry we're never going to get it. So one of the kind of areas that I'm writing on and looking at is the counterbalance of that, which is over-tourism, what it means, how we might tackle it, because Mihaly's made the recent comment that over-tourism is unsustainable tourism, and she's absolutely right. What we're looking at in those places, and it's not just towns. I mean, you've got over-tourism in rural areas as well, because I think it's a relative term. And so I think I'm quite excited about what I've been doing with a colleague, Rachel Dodds, on over-tourism, both in urban areas and in general. And part of the sort of spin-off from that is an area I've been interested in a long time is dealing with the power relations in tourism. I've edited a couple of books on political change and tourism, but it's not just political change, like what we're seeing in Ukraine and the effect that will have, or changing from Trump to Biden and what impact that will have on tourism to and from the States and so on. But who controls tourism to places? One of the reasons I think we can't get a handle on over-tourism is because tourist destinations don't really control tourism. They're controlled, tourism numbers are controlled quite often by airlines, ferry companies, railways, the agencies that are bringing people in. And the tourist destinations very often have no power to deal with that. They don't own the airport, they don't own the port, so they can't limit. I mean, Victoria is limiting its number of ships. Other places haven't been able to. The classic case is Venice, which has been talking about limiting tourists for 130 years, and it's still getting more and more tourists and more chaotic because it doesn't control the airport, which is on the mainland. It doesn't control the harbour, which the cruise ships come to, and it doesn't control the landslip at the end of the causeway where many of the new hotels are built. So it's deluged with short-term trippers coming in, which it has no way of stopping. And so it's the power relations under the surface, which I'd like to do some more research on and see what goes. So that links in with tourism and controlling tourism and over-tourism. And the other pet interest is in remote islands, because they're one of the few places quite often, if they control the means of access, that they can put up the barriers and stop it. But there aren't many places that can do that.
How would you say your interest in things like sustainability, power relations, and of course remote islands relate back to maybe your personal tourist interests and education?
Well, I'm just a nut for islands, I always have been. I think the sustainability aspect comes from being a geographer, where you grow up looking at the interrelationships between people and places and the environment. And one of the points I made this morning was, I think it's a great pity that many people in tourism really don't have any environmental background. So when you're talking about climate change and tourism, or what tourism might do to cut down on climate change or environmental impact, most of the people writing have no environmental training or background at all. And that's a weakness that really we haven't been able to overcome sufficiently. So the sustainability comes from a geography background, training in geography, The island stuff comes just because as a bird watcher, I visited a lot of islands, and I liked islands, and the two tie together. Islands and geography tie together quite well. So, yeah, a lot of my research stems out of personal interest. And I've always advised students when I've been supervising them that only do something you're interested in for a thesis. Don't ever do a thesis because somebody says it's a good idea. Only do it if you really want to, because if you're spending anything from a few months to 3 years of your life researching something, it better be something you're interested in. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it'll die and you'll die with it.
No, absolutely. And I mean, as a fellow geographer, I know that tourism is usually important because it's the largest form of temporary migration that we have, and it's deeply connected to places and environments. Yet in your talk, you had mentioned that tourism research and tourism studies seems to lack academic credibility. What do you think is the cause behind that lack of credibility or respect?
It's something the old guys like me, the same generation, Jeff Wall, Peter Murphy, Doug Pierce and others, have often sort of sat around over a beer and moaned, and even younger ones like Mike Hall, and we don't know, we never have. I think part of it is that tourism is about pleasure. And although it sounds, outdated to say it, I think there's something going back in people's mind that studying pleasure isn't really serious. It's a mental contradiction that, you're studying people having fun. Well, why not? Fun and leisure nowadays is more important than work. I mean, it used to be you worked and then you rested at the weekend so you were fit for work on Monday. Now, you work so you can enjoy the weekend and the time off. Work isn't the thing in itself. It's increasingly people are saying no, and COVID has had an effect on that. Lifestyle is much more important than my work. So it's work-lifestyle relationship that I want to deal with. So to me, it's stupid not to give tourism as a subject for research the respect it deserves. It's a major money earner. It's the backbone of economies of, small countries, but it's significant for some quite big countries in terms of the number of people it employs. And sometimes we say, well, the real reason is that everybody thinks they know it because everybody goes on holiday. So, I've been a tourist, I know what happens, and, that's it. And it's really hard to break into that. I'm not somebody who argues tourism is a discipline in the same way that economics or geography or history is a discipline. I prefer people to have a basis in, if you like, a classical subject. But then I think, it's a critically important subject that deserves serious research. And research councils, governments, academic institutions should get their head out of the sand and give us the respect we deserve. Because there's a lot of decent research and a lot of industry that does use the results of some of the research. So it's difficult, there isn't an answer. And I think we get grudging respects in some places more than we ever did, which is not before time.
Yeah, and I mean, knowing all that, given that are more tourism journals, more tourism industry associations, do you think that lack of respect persists today, or would you say that things are changing?
I'd like to think things are changing. I think universities are well aware of the income potential from tourism students, overly so I think in some cases. I think there is more grudging respect, but one thing that hasn't helped it, and this is unfortunate to say this, but is that in some countries a lot of the tourism programs are in newer universities, and newer universities themselves have a very difficult time getting respect from the old universities who is how it should be done. And as long as that persistence and that sort of squaring works, there's a double whammy against doing tourism in a relatively new university that hasn't had the chance to have a 200-year reputation. And so that is hurtful and unfair criticism and disrespect, but you know, that's life. Nobody said academics was fair or reasonable.
No, absolutely. Who have been some of your greatest influences or inspirations throughout your rather long academic career and research?
Of sort of peers, Roy Wolf, who was one of the first Canadian scientific geographers based in York University in Toronto. Roy was streets ahead of many of us in his approach to research. Of colleagues, I mentioned some, Jeff Wall, particularly Peter Murphy, Doug Pierce, I've had the pleasure of working with. And you know, it sounds a bit cliche to say your students, but I've published a lot with students, and I've used students as co-editors with books and writing chapters for books. And I've just been very, very lucky having a great bunch of students at different institutions that have worked and built careers. So people like Professor Keller, David Weaver, David Fennell, Rachel Dodds, that are professors in their own rights now. You know, and I've learned from them, from what they've done working under me as PhD students, or you know, making their own contributions. Weaver to the tourism model, Tom Hinch in Alberta, that we did books on tourism and Indigenous peoples, stuff like that. So you know, it's sort of, a lot of people say, well, I've been lucky with the students, but I really have. There's a big debt to, I think a debt more than many academics want to admit, that you know, students have picked you up on something and said, you know, that doesn't seem to work, you know, or you know, have you thought about doing it this way? And that's really, you know, useful and important if you are going to continue to develop. You know, so I never turn down the chance to examine a PhD student because they're at the cutting edge. And, you know, so it gives you the opportunity to read something that is just coming out that's new and exciting, and you gain as much from it as they may get from any criticism you can, you know, pass back the other way. So, I mean, lots of people, seriously. You know.
Yeah, well, thinking about it maybe from the other side of the table, as a student, what advice do you have for young geographers and tourism researchers who are interested in academia or just tourism in general?
It's harsh to say it after COVID, but it's possibly one of the best times ever to start working in tourism, because the research questions are just piling up, waiting to be asked, waiting to be answered. So even more than normal, I mean, I would say any time is a good time to be a tourism researcher. And I think, well, I would say that as a geographer, I think geography is logically the best place to study tourism from, because we study the human side of it, we can study the economic side, the physical side, the political side, all under a geography rubric. So it gives us, I think, an added advantage of looking at the whole picture rather than just, you know, one side of it. And I think, you know, COVID has created such a new situation that there are going to be opportunities opening up for good research that haven't opened up for years. For people to grab. So, you know, my kids are past the university stage. None of them went into tourism, although since that, two of the three of them have done papers in tourism and begrudgingly admitted that Dad's thing wasn't too bad. So no, I mean, I think it's a great time, and it's something, you know, it's a great opportunity not to be missed.
So just to conclude this segment on maybe a little bit more of a fantastical note, have you done any research or even just had a pet interest in how tourism is depicted in futuristic movies? And if so, do you agree with what you've seen?
Good question. I'm not one for much futuristic stuff. I mean, Total Recall is probably the one which comes to mind as what could go wrong in tourism. But no, I mean, I'm quite fervently opposed to space travel. I mean, I think, how can we talk seriously about sustainability and even contemplate space travel, and why you would want to space travel? I mean, I would love to see the Earth from, outer space. The idea of sitting in a windowless capsule going around the Earth looking at the screen of what you're seeing out there doesn't appeal to me at all. And it's just so against everything we're talking about of energy, emission, conservation and everything else. So traveling to planets, no, I mean, forget it. I don't think, but who am I to say when I consider what's happened in the 50 years, but I don't think we'll ever move Earth human beings to live on another planet seriously. We might colonize it with a few people. And so the idea of tourism to other planets, I can't see being at all realistic. Fine in movies. I mean, many of the other movies are fun movies, and fine. I don't think anybody really has any. I don't see the virtual tourism replacing real tourism. I think it's good to get a taste of what you might see when you're out there in reality. So, I've never been lucky enough to get to Pompeii, but I would love to do a virtual tour of Pompeii and then go and see it. The virtual stuff wouldn't put me off going, it would attract me more to go and see it. But whether I'm typical in that or not, I don't know. I mean, there are places, China is probably the classic one, of building examples of iconic sites, villages, places for people in China to visit. They're not claiming they are the other places, but they're making the image available in the flesh, as it were, to Chinese citizens who would probably never be able to go in their lifetime to those places. And that's Disney in a different form, and there's nothing wrong with that. I took my kids to Disney and they loved it.
Yep.
And I had fun at it. So, the theme park stuff to me is fine. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of mass tourism. We've got too many people. We had 1.4 billion tourists before COVID, and most of them appear to want to come back as tourists post-COVID, and many places want them back. So I don't think the immediate future will be very different from the immediate past. I think there's an underflow, an undertow of movement wanting a more sustainable, greener, more pleasant, low-intensity tourism. It would be nice if they got it, but I don't think there are enough tourists that seriously want that to go around to keep places in business. So a lot of places will have to rely on offering modified versions of what they were offering before. And so for the next 2 or 3 decades, I think we'll just see variations on what we've got now. 50 years' time, I don't know. Transport has always driven each new wave in tourism. I just don't see the next wave being space travel, the moon, or whatever. But if you'd asked me 100 years ago, I wouldn't have seen jet aircraft. So I wouldn't have believed that people from North America would go to Hawaii or go to New Zealand and Australia for a 2-week holiday. So, old people are no better than anybody else for seeing the future. I think we've seen the future, and it's what we've got with a few changes, And in one sense, I hope I'm wrong, but I hope the changes are for the better, not
Not the
not
other
for
way
the
around.
worse.
Well, space tourism, virtual tourism, those all sound like excellent topics for any graduate students. out
Oh,
there.
absolutely.
But that concludes all of my questions for today. Thank you once again for coming out and taking the time to speak with us. It was wonderful to hear more about you, your research, and your interests.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.